everyone. I know people are just shuffling in now, but welcome to the Feeding Minds, Not Landfills, Why Reducing School Food and Packaging Waste Matters webinar. My name is Mara Fleischman. I'm the CEO of the Chef Ann Foundation, and I'm thrilled to be moderating today's important conversation on food and packaging waste in schools. I'm really excited to say that we have had over 800 people sign up for this webinar, which signals that this is a really important issue for people. And I'm excited to have the conversation. But before we get started, let's do some housekeeping so that we can all get as much out of this webinar as possible. First, I just want to say that this webinar is the first of a three-part series that we have at the Chef Ann Foundation this year through November. The next one is called Reducing Ultra-Processed Meals, the next chapter in school food, and that's September 17th. And following that, we have School Meals for a Sustainable Future, Local, Organic, and Regenerative. And that one is on November 19th. So this webinar will be recorded. So we can access this at a later date. We will be sending it out to everyone who registered for the webinar. We are really encouraging you to engage with us throughout the webinar. You can use the chat to connect with each other. Feel free to share where you're joining from, what brings you here today, any kind of information you might have as the webinar continues and moves forward and goes through different topic areas. If you want to submit a question to the panelists, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your frame. Any questions that can be quickly answered or clarified by a Chef Ann Foundation team member will be answered in real time for you. But we have reserved time at the end to allow for audience questions. So your question might be picked for answering at the end. And then any questions we don't get to in today's discussion, we will do our best to address in a post-webinar email. We'll also capture any of the highlighted links and information that gets posted in the chat for inclusion in that post-webinar email, so you kind of have a resource once the email is complete. I love that everyone's introducing themselves in the chat. Thanks so much. Okay, well, we're going to kick it off. So we know that schools play a critical role in shaping not only what kids eat, but also how we think about waste and sustainability. And with schools generating over 14,000 tons of solid waste daily, 42% of which is packaging, this is a challenge that really demands our attention. But with challenges come opportunity, and today we'll explore solutions that can reduce waste, save money, and create more sustainable school food systems. We're joined by an incredible panel of experts who I have a lot of gratitude for. They are bringing their unique insights from research, policy, and school food operations. So today on our panel, we have Stephanie Lip, who is the Chef Ann Foundation Senior Director of Operations for West Coast. We have Pete Pearson, who's Vice President of Food Loss and Waste at World Wildlife Fund. We have Kaitlyn Harper, who is an assistant scientist at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. And we have Yvette Cabrera, who's Director of Food Waste at Natural Resources Defense Council. So thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. Let's dive into this discussion and really start unpacking what change can really look like. Let's kick it off with Pete Pearson from World Wildlife Fund. Pete, can you introduce yourself and tell our audience a little bit more about you and about World Wildlife Fund?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Mara. Again, Pete Pearson. I've been at World Wildlife Fund for the last 10 years, and I work as part of our food and agriculture program globally. The connection, I mean, some often think like World Wildlife Funds, food waste, food systems, what's the connection here? And it's the fact that about 70% of the biodiversity loss that we see on the planet is directly attributed to expanding agriculture and often food production. So when you look at our mission as a biodiversity and saving nature, food systems play a huge role in that pressure that we put on nature. And when we waste 30 to 40% of all the food we produce, like that's not a logical equation to keep going, and it's not sustainable long term. So that's a little bit about me and a little bit about us and why we work on it.
Thanks, Pete. So my first question for you is World Wildlife Fund has really done extensive research on food loss and waste. What unique challenges do schools face compared to other parts of the food system?
Well, I think why we chose to work on school food systems is because one, it represents like one of the largest food service programs in the country. Um, a lot of people describe it, and I totally agree. It's like this small miracle that happens every single day when you feed 30 plus thousand, or I'm sorry, 30 million plus students every day across almost 100,000 schools. And so when you look at the school system, it represents a big hotspot for consumption. We did a report back in 2009 as part of our Food Waste Warriors program. So we can put up a link to this Food Waste Warriors program. And what we found was an enormous amount of estimated food waste generated every single year, 530,000 tons of food waste we estimated. And we looked at like what happens in a cafeteria every day, and the fact that when you start to look at things differently, when you start to approach waste reduction and start to see it and start to actively implement things to prevent it, you can make a serious dent in it. And through better design, we saw some schools between 14% to upwards of 20% or more food waste reduction with active interventions on this in the cafeteria. And that not only saves a lot of food going to landfill, but it's a huge financial savings potentially. And what I love about this is if we're able to save money by wasting less food, we could potentially redirect that into putting more money into foods that are of higher quality and higher environmental quality. And it could be a really good way to reinvest and open eyes of the impact that food systems do have on the planet. So, we did this across a whole host of cities over the course of a full year, and we've continued our Food Waste Warrior program, helping to provide grants to schools. And really, I mean, our goal is to see that all 100,000 plus schools in the country have a concerted effort to focus on food waste reduction in the cafeteria. We want everybody to be doing this.
Thank you so much. That's great. And the Food Waste Warriors is such an incredible project. I remember when it first came out and reading um, some of the research coming out of that. It was really eye-opening. And yes, with an average reimbursable rate of $4.30, any savings we can find will only help improve school food. So thanks so much.
Yeah.
Next, we are going to move to Kaitlyn Harper. Kaitlyn, can you introduce yourself and tell our audience a little bit more about you and about what you do at Johns Hopkins?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Kaitlyn Harper. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm an assistant scientist at the Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg School for Public Health. And my role there, I'm a researcher. And so I study two things. I study wasted food and I study food access and food security. And oftentimes those things are overlapping in my research as well. So that is what I do on a day-to-day basis. I used to be a high school science teacher before I entered the realm of public health. And so I'm also familiar with kind of the ins and outs of what's happening in schools. And I'm really happy to be here.
Great. Love that. I love that you were a high school science teacher too. So cool. Okay, so what research is needed to really understand the scalability of effective strategies to reduce food and packaging waste in schools in the US particularly?
Yeah, I think this is a great question because scalability is really important. So I generally think about two types of research that we need, the effectiveness piece and the implementation piece, and I'll break those down for you. So we tend to see more studies that focus on the effectiveness of strategies or interventions, so how well those certain strategies work in really specific settings. And this is really super useful because it helps us build an evidence base for what schools should prioritize or not prioritize when they're looking to reduce waste. Um, but we really rarely focus on what makes those interventions effective. So that's where implementation research comes in. And implementation research focuses on the factors that lead to the success of the strategies or the factors that hinder schools and districts from implementing those. So for example, right now, myself and a team of researchers, so I have a colleague, Ronnie Neff at Johns Hopkins, Melissa Prescott from Case Western Reserve University, and our helpful folks at World Wildlife Fund. So we have Pete and Alex and Mary Jane there. We are all conducting a study in 4 diverse districts across the US to understand how schools can use 2 types of interventions, share tables and composting, which we could talk about later, to help reduce wasted food. So we're wrapping up that study, next month after working in these school districts for 2 years, measuring how well those interventions work to reduce waste. But an equally important piece of this project is understanding what factors helped the district set up those interventions, what helped them keep them running over the past 2 years, and how they're planning to sustain them. So, as you all know, we, as in the federal government, state government, parents, society in general, we all ask schools to do so much, but we often don't provide the directions or the resources or support that come along with those asks. And so quickly, I'll tell you a little bit about what we found in this study. And one of the things that we found is that districts that have really strong ties with a community partner, so say an environmental nonprofit organization in the area, they can really help a lot with the setup and the management of those wasted food interventions. Those community partners help add capacity in districts, both large and small districts, that oftentimes the admin and the staff just don't have the capacity to implement those new interventions. And then we've also seen throughout this study times when study schools have stopped using the intervention. So they stopped using their composter, they stopped using their share tables. And, maybe that's because there's turnover in the cafeteria or the kitchen staff, or, in one case, the composter that was outside was wafting smells into the gym and it was like causing huge problems in the school. And so they wanted to stop using the composter, which makes total sense. And I think in a study that just looks at effectiveness, we could say, well, sorry, the intervention doesn't work. It doesn't reduce wasted food. But that's not really the whole picture. And, when we look at why things went wrong, that's when it can help us actually solve those problems and create guidelines that, we can use in the future to help mitigate those from the beginning. And the last thing I want to say about this is just, it's really important to talk to the right people in the research. So doing both those quantitative studies that are going to quantify how much wasted food is diverted, but also thinking about the qualitative piece and like whose voices need to be heard here. So in our study, we've been conducting interviews with people like administrators and kitchen workers, cafeteria staff and custodians and community partners, all of those folks, because they're all part of the picture. And so we've been interviewing them over this 2-year period so we can really capture the changes in the different phases from setup to, implementation to then sustaining it. So I think just to wrap up, we need more studies like this that look at both things, the effectiveness and the implementation. And we need them in a diverse set of districts because we all know that every single school and every single district is unique. But if we look at enough of them, we can come up with some general guidelines that can help us reduce food and packaging waste.
Kaitlyn, thank you so much. That was really informative, and I cannot wait till this research comes out. We, and I'm sure Stephanie will get to this, but at the Chef Ann Foundation, working with so many districts across the country, we see districts that are in areas that have support services for composting and districts that are in areas that have no support services for composting. And it's like, in areas where there is no support services, they do not know what to do. And having just been in a middle school yesterday, during school lunch, I will say that there was it was great to see a share table, great to see they were serving bananas and there was a lot of bananas that were put onto the share table. And, I have a 14-year-old boy who happens to be 6'2" and 190 pounds. He's a big kid and he gets hungry. And I saw one of the larger boys kind of looking at the share table, and right as lunch ended, he went by and picked up 3 bananas, just and kind of scooted by. And I was like, oh, that is so awesome. Like he needs more calories. He's a bigger guy, and that's available to him. So very cool to see that. All right. Well, we are going to move to Stephanie Lip, who is at the Chef Ann Foundation. Stephanie, can you introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit about what you do?
For sure. Thanks for joining, everyone. I'm Stephanie Lip, and I am our Senior Director of Operations for the West Coast. And what that means is that I get to lead a lovely team of operations folks that help in supporting our school districts in providing training and technical assistance to help them move along their scratch cooking journey. I was a former food service director in the Monterey area and have been in school food now for 11 years. And I just want to shout out to all the school food professionals that are dropping in their names and their districts in the chat. It's really amazing to see you all join this webinar.
Huge shout out. And I am so lucky to get to work with Stephanie, who has an incredible temperament for the work that she does, which is super challenging sometimes. So, on top of incredible knowledge. So, Steph, from your experience, what do you think are the biggest barriers schools face when trying to reduce food and package waste? And how can they overcome them? What are some examples you've seen out there?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I think this probably will resonate with a lot of other school food professionals that a shortage of labor, time, and budget constraints are really our biggest barriers. We know that food and packaging waste can be mitigated by implementing scratch cooking. Naturally, there's less packaging when handling whole unprocessed foods. And with proper menu planning, standardized recipes, forecasting, schools can certainly reduce food and packaging waste through that avenue. However, these barriers of the lack of time, the labor shortages, and those tight budgets really make things more challenging. So for a time perspective, schools are notoriously limited in time, specifically during their meal service times. So for example, some schools might only have a 10 to 15-minute window of time to serve after the bell breakfast. And this includes the time for students to get from class to and through that serving line, have time to eat, and then also make it back in time for their next class. So that's why schools sometimes may be leaning on individually packaged foods just to ensure that they can serve as many students as possible, knowing that this could probably be that student's only opportunity to even have breakfast that day. In terms of labor, in a recent survey conducted by the School Nutrition Association, it's been found that 88% of the respondents, typically, school food service directors or supervisors, they reported that staffing shortages are still a challenge to increasing scratch cooking. So then again, this can also attribute to the reason why some districts are reliant on prepackaged foods. And then of course, our budget constraints. We know that school meal programs are funded by reimbursements after serving compliant school meals. And these meal programs are typically expected to be self-sustaining. They're supposed to cover their own expenses with these federal and sometimes state reimbursements, and maybe have some program sales such as catering to help, bump that budget up. But even at the highest federal reimbursement, schools may be receiving $4.69 for each compliant meal served. And while that doesn't sound like a lot, but for some, maybe it seems like a lot, sometimes 40% of that is already wiped out just from labor. So that might just leave a little over $2.80 for food, supplies, and everything else. And without additional support from the district as a whole, and without significant increases in meal participation, some departments are just really limited in funding, and that might not justify, other expenses like implementing eco-friendly alternatives, such as reusable trays, maybe compostable serviceware or packaging, or implementing food waste reduction programs, which might require that upfront cost. For some solutions, I would say, I know that was like a lot of barriers, and to kind of bring us back up, there are a lot of grants out there that could support some of these ways to overcome the barriers. So there's some federal and local equipment grants out there. California offered a commercial dishwasher grant for school districts, which awarded up to like $200,000 per district. And I'd say that we have a successful story from California where Albany Unified School District was able to find a grant with Stop Waste, and they purchased a dishwasher for their central kitchen, and then were also able to purchase some reusable trays and serviceware for their other schools. And then, to not just stop on scratch cooking because of all these barriers, but really just starting with one thing, I think, is a great place. Maybe there's one item that you can see that you can remove the packaging and just start working bulk. And then from there, maybe you can start working on seeing if you can move that into speed scratch and scratch. I think just finding one item to identify ways to reduce the footprint is a great place to start.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I just want to reiterate, like, school food professionals have a really challenging job that seems to get more challenging by the day. And the fact we have so many school food professionals signed up for this webinar is just, it's really amazing because there's so many people that want to push and do more and do better, and we know it's hard. So thank you. And I also want to say that sometimes we see labor taking up 60% of that reimbursable rate. And that's also, continuing to grow as cost of living grows too. So lots of complications, but glad there's opportunities. All right, we are going to move on to Yvette Cabrera from the Natural Resource Defense Council. Yvette, can you introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit more about you and NRDC?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for having me here today. I'm Yvette Cabrera with NRDC for short, and I've been with NRDC for about 7 years. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we're a big environmental nonprofit that's been around for about 50 years, and we've worked on major environmental laws like the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, but we also work on things like saving whales and reducing food waste. It's in our name to defend natural resources, and we see food and all of the embedded things that go in it as a natural resource. So my team here at NRDC kind of takes a multi-pronged approach to reducing food waste. We work at the local level with city governments and community organizations to implement programs like curbside composting or consumer awareness campaigns. We work at the state level to pass progressive policies like organic waste bans or bills to standardize food date labels. We actually just passed one in California recently. And we work at the federal level, mostly with a group that we co-founded with WWF. Pete here on the call from WWF is one of our closest partners, but also the other co-founders are Harvard and ReFed, and we work with this Zero Food Waste Coalition to advocate for better policies around food waste reduction from the federal government and also from state governments. And I'll just say that as a new mom of an 8-month-old, I'm thinking a lot about food waste in my home right now. We just started solids, and I'm seeing just how real it is when he drops everything onto the floor, and thinking about how to, mitigate that within my own home as well.
Thank you, Yvette. I really appreciate it. And God, I can remember those days. So exciting. Okay, so we are going to move on to some kind of more general questions. I believe, yes, here. Oh no, I'm sorry. We have a question for Yvette specifically. So there are many promising policy happenings at the federal, state, and local levels that can really help reduce food waste, but NRDC has been a leader in advocating for policy change. So what promising state or federal policies are you currently being are currently being proposed to tackle food waste that could be applied to schools? Because sometimes it's hard, right? Schools, it doesn't always equate to schools. So what do you think could be applied to schools?
Yeah, absolutely. And a couple of the policy opportunities have already been highlighted, but I wanted to touch on a few. So some of you may have heard of a federal bill called the School Food Recovery Act. It's been introduced a couple of times before, but it is a bipartisan bill to create a new program at USDA that would provide grants to schools to work on food waste reduction projects. So if the bill passed, it would provide funds directly to school districts to do food waste education in the classrooms, but also to do things like measurement or equipment purchasing or things like that within the cafeteria. And this is a bill that we've actually worked on for a while with WWF and our other partners. And we've heard that it's going to be reintroduced into Congress soon. And so we're looking out for that. And that's one of the things that we'll be kind of advocating to get passed this year, if that's possible. So that's something to look out for. And then Stephanie also mentioned some kind of federal funding opportunities to support, food waste reduction work within schools. And that's definitely something to take a look at. One of the things that our kind of Zero Food Waste Coalition has really been advocating around is to ensure that federal funds are made available to support food waste reduction projects, and some of that within schools. And so there are a couple of different ways that we can take a look at that. So one way, some of you may have heard this term before, but we are in appropriation season, which is in the federal government. It's basically when Congress allocates money to different parts of the federal government, and specific or congressional members actually get the opportunity to allocate some funds within their own districts. And so they often will accept ideas from folks within their districts for projects that should get funded. So this is a really great way to engage with your local congressional representative and share whatever need you might have around a food waste reduction project for your school or for your community. And that's happening right now. So if I will share a link in the chat afterwards, which is kind of like a guide to unlocking funding through appropriations, if that's of interest to folks. And then another kind of funding opportunity that we're hoping will become available this year, and it has historically become available every year, is the composting and food waste reduction cooperative agreements. And this is a program that is issued through USDA, the Office of Urban Agriculture and Innovation. I forget the full acronym, but someone here probably knows that better than I do. And every year they issue millions of dollars in funding, and schools are one of the eligible applicants. And it's purely to fund food waste related projects within a community. And that could be even funding like a planning study or something like that, or it could be as tangible as actual kind of food waste equipment, or like a composting equipment or something like that. And then lastly, I'll just say you've heard a lot about share tables today, or it's been mentioned a couple of times. This is one of the things that NRDC and the Zero Food Waste Coalition do a lot of advocacy around. But USDA does have guidance for schools on share tables, but it's really on the states to interpret that guidance for their specific state and provide guidance to schools on what they can do within their locations. And so while many states have issued guidance, we really do need kind of clearer guidance from states on what these should look like within schools. And so actually we've NRDC has taken a look at many states throughout the country and found that the guidance that they've issued actually isn't clear enough and doesn't provide kind of clear enough guidance to school districts in order to implement this properly and safely. So that's one thing that is really easy to take a look at in your own state and figure out if there's a way to kind of get better guidance so that we can make sure schools are, able to do this in the right way.
Thank you, Yvette. That was great. I want to just comment before we go on to the next questions that one of the thoughts we had in this webinar was, the Chef Ann Foundation really approaches our work from a systems-based lens, right? So what system does school food live in that, that creates barriers from serving more freshly prepared scratch-made meals? And I think this whole webinar series comes to you from that systems-based lens of what are these problems we have and what is the systems that they live in and how can we talk about some of these opportunities and challenges. And that's why we have people like Yvette from the policy perspective and, Kaitlyn and Pete from research and Stephanie from operations, because we want to really talk about it as a whole. All right, well, we have some panelists, get ready. We have some general questions for you that please jump in. Our first question is and this isn't from the audience yet, this is with general questions we have. We'll get to audience questions in a bit. How can school districts and local communities really advocate for stronger policies that prioritize food waste reduction while ensuring equitable access to quality meals?
I'll offer some thoughts. The one thing here I think I would highlight for the group is get students involved in this. Have these things be student-led, because at least in my experience, when you get a group of passionate youth-led engagement, like, it is powerful. I mean, it is far and away better than having a room full of adults if you get the students involved, right? And the other thing that's amazing about student energy and youth energy is they smell out the BS that we bring as adults, and like all the barriers and all the constraints that we have in our head, like, they don't see it that way. And it's so refreshing. It's so amazing. There's an example that we put in the chat that a group of students from Maryland that we supported really took a new approach to how they wanted to do advocacy. They did a postcard writing campaign to their state legislature. A guy by the name of Joe Richardson helped to organize this. Joe's an amazing person. They got 9,000 postcards sent to the state legislature that helped them pass composting bills within the state of Maryland. And this is what I'm saying, like, when you get the students involved in these things, when you get the students doing a food waste audit in the cafeteria, when you get them asking questions, it really presses the buttons of the adults in the room to have to answer up to that and to have to move on it. And, I think if you had that same action of what was going on in Maryland spread across all 50 states, there is a window where we could solve this problem in 3 to 5 years. Like, these types of timelines are totally possible. We don't have to think on 10-year time horizons. We can make major changes quickly, but I think it has to be getting the youth involved and getting them to lead it.
Thanks.
If I could just piggyback back on that, is that okay? Okay,
Yes.
great. Yeah, I just wanted to share too. I was so inspired by a story of these students that we actually worked with in Virginia Beach from a high school there. They're part of their local Food Rescue US chapter. And they actually, this was back in 2022, I believe, wrote and introduced a bill at the state level to amend food liability protections and kind of broaden those protections within the state. And they got it passed. And it was just a really amazing example of the power of students and what they can do when they put their minds to it. And they actually have now introduced another bill that they're working on related to food waste. And now they've all gone off to college and have brought that to their universities. And they've actually joined our Zero Food Waste Coalition as well. And so I just also wanted to plug that. I know I mentioned the Zero Food Waste Coalition, but It's a really wonderful group. We have about 250 members across the US. We have a couple of different school districts represented already, and local governments. It's just a great way to get involved on policy or just kind of stay in the know on what's happening on federal and state policy within the US, and a good way to kind of lend your voice to some of the policy issues you might care about. So we can drop a link in the chat on how to kind of become a member for the Zero Food Waste Coalition.
That's great. Thanks, Yvette. And I love that we have someone in the chat. I think I'm pronouncing her name right, Karen Shine. She said, "My father used to say in his work, get the kids, get the parents," which I love. Okay, great. Well, we have another question here. So how do we think schools can integrate food waste reduction efforts into their sustainability goals while balancing cost and operational constraints?
I'll jump in for that one. Yeah, so we know that schools are definitely great, vital places to help shape behavior, and especially, sustainable waste behavior. As Pete was saying earlier, nearly 30 million students spend time in school cafeterias every day, which creates a consistent environment that's ideal for reinforcing good behavior change. So schools can help in reconnecting kids back to their food, fostering ownership over any waste concerns in their schools as well as their community. So really build that buy-in from the students. We've seen schools implement some menu-based strategies such as like offer versus serve, and that just means that students can choose 3 out of the 5 meal components to make up a reimbursable meal. And we also know that like when kids choose what they want to eat, they're more likely to eat it than when they're being served the whole tray and being like, this is what you get. So that's where we might see more waste. And I know that in the chat, we've seen some districts mention bulk milk. So we've also seen more districts operating bulk milk dispensers where the students can then dispense the amount of milk that they'd like. So instead of taking that 8-ounce carton all the time, they can just dispense what they want. And yesterday, we just opened up our applications for our bulk milk grants. So definitely check into that if you're a school food professional. And yeah, we talked a lot about share tables, and I think that where share tables can really be integrated is that if they're temperature controlled, there's more opportunity to recover food properly. So that's definitely an opportunity for schools to recover things like milk, where students maybe are taking that 8-ounce carton of milk because they think they need to. And a lot of times they might just toss it out and not even open it. So if you have temperature controlled share bins, you can definitely help recover that milk properly and safely so that you can use it back into your meal programs. And some food recovery programs, I think, that are successful are where the partnership with a community organization comes to pick up the meals. So I think working that out with local organizations to help with that will help in terms of those operational and budget barriers where you're not having to have staff save meals, then maybe drop off meals. You can have that partnership help with that. And then I think waste sorting in cafeterias also helps with reducing overall waste, because then that food waste can then be transformed into compost. And in the schools where I've seen waste sorting implemented, I hear about how much time it takes to train the students, on sorting compost, trash, and recycling. But a lot of schools, like Pete mentioned, get their student ambassadors and get little green teams to then help their own peers, get used to that sorting. So a lot of this is kind of in the cafeteria base, but I think the responsibility to fostering these new habits doesn't lie solely on the cafeteria. It really is a whole district, school district collaboration, where there needs to be collaboration between the district's facilities department, and that might require, again, some upfront costs and additional training, which you need that whole school district to buy into this.
If I could just offer like 15 seconds. Just a vote for the share refrigerator too that Stephanie mentioned. This is a relatively low investment. $300 to $500 gets this thing installed. It's perfect for PTAs or PTOs. And I think it could be like an ice bucket challenge moment where we just get every school to get a share refrigerator. And man, that gets things moving. That gets people thinking differently about how to change the cafeteria.
And I think just adding quickly onto that, it's really helpful to have those be like see-through, clear in the front, just so that students can see what is in there, what needs to be taken out. You can think about cleanliness and all of those things.
Great points, everyone. Thank you. Okay, we have one more question, maybe two more, before we go to some audience questions. This one, I'm interested about, understanding if there's any specific interventions that research suggests are most effective in reducing food and packaging waste in cafeterias.
Yeah, I can take this. And it sort of builds on actually what Stephanie was saying with the last question. Really all of the things that we've been talking about, there needs to be more research. There really hasn't been that much research done specifically on wasted food. In recent years, there's been more, but historically it's all been about consumption. So what the kids are actually eating without measuring how much waste is being left over at the end. So just a plug for that, like everyone out there, reach out to your local university, reach out to your local organizations and say, hey, we need to do a wasted food study or a food packaging study in our school or our district. So that said, there was a review by Dr. Sarah Elnikib at Rutgers Community or Cooperative Extension, and she and her colleagues looked at all of the studies that have been done in the past decade or so that had to do with wasted food. They found 19 of them. And as Stephanie was talking about with like offer versus serve, the most successful interventions were the policy changes, kind of at the more district level or the school admin level. So having recess before lunch or extending the length of the lunch periods or offer versus serve. Those are the ones that had the biggest impact in reducing waste. There were some other ones. There were kind of two other buckets. There were these educational programs, which were farm to school and nutrition education programs, and then specific changes made in the cafeteria and the kitchen. So things like using fruit slicers or removing flavored milk as an option or moving the placement of the salad bar, like those types of things. And those saw really mixed results. So some of them were positive, and some of them were negative in that they actually increased waste, and some of them had really mixed results. And again, I mean, like as I was talking about earlier, I think that we can't really judge based on just the results without saying, what was going on behind the scenes, how were they implemented? So I think that's a really important piece that, I want to reiterate there. But yeah, I guess I just want to say that those policy changes were the ones that consistently led to waste reduction, but there were actually only 3 of them that found that. There were only 3 that were done in the first place, and so more research is needed there. So yeah, maybe I'll stop there actually.
Well, thank you, Kaitlyn. And we have so many questions in the chat that we're going to move to questions from the attendees now. And if we have time at the end, I think I have another question, but we'll save that to the end. So this, just let me know if you want to answer. You guys can jump in. This is not coming to anyone particular. So first question is, what role do local government and community organizations play in supporting schools to reduce food waste, and what resources are available to help us implement these changes? Anyone have?
I mean, local governance for sure. Like you got to start even at school board level or school administrative levels. Like they're going to either make something sink or swim in terms of trying to just do anything within a cafeteria. So it's really important to get that hyper local school awareness going. And then, you got to look at how you want to do collection and landfill diversion. And that always comes back to a city and a municipality for how it structures that. Some don't have it prioritized. And I think students and student voices can help to put that on the agenda for a city and to really get it moving within the community.
Great. Anyone else? We have more questions, so I can move on.
I just wanted to flag, I saw in the Q&A somebody flagged a toolkit from the Environmental Law Institute on, it's basically a model policy on share tables. That's definitely a resource that's available to you all. And then I also linked in the Q&A a hyperlink that leads to the Zero Food Waste Coalition's state model policy toolkit. And there's a whole section in there on K through 12 schools that might be of interest as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Yvette. Thanks, Pete. Okay, next question from the chat. What top priority changes besides bulk milk and reducing packaged snacks do you recommend on procurement to reduce packaging or food waste? That one might, I think, be for you, Steph.
Yeah, I'm just rereading the question.
Yeah, go right ahead. Yeah.
100%. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's great opportunity with procurement and working with vendors that are interested in getting into school food. So, besides reducing the packaging, I think there are vendors out there, food producers out there that are working on mitigating food waste, so that when you get it, you're helping that process. So there are some farms out there that might have products that typically are just like left in the field because they're overripe. And I'll just talk about a couple of companies. So like the Ugly Fruit Company, for example, in the Central Valley of California, they've recovered these overripe fruit that typically just get left in the field because they're overripened. They're not going to sell it fresh. So instead of just leaving it in the field, they've now turned it into really delicious, sweet, dried fruit that are now being sold in schools. So I feel like looking at some of those food producers and vendors that maybe share those values with you, and finding them and finding opportunities to get their products into the school food market is something that districts can work on. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's when you can find the mind space for some deep procurement strategy like this, it is awesome. And I know, like, I feel for some of the smaller districts who don't have someone dedicated to procurement, that some of the bigger districts have. But for instance, one of our plants grantees, Boston Public and Portland Public Unified School District, they are creating a unique menu item called a field fritter. And they are buying a cover crop from farmers in Maine to create that item, which, I mean, one, that cover crop would not have gotten used if this didn't happen, but two, the farmer would not have gotten paid for that cover crop. So those are two things that are really interesting. Okay, well, we have more questions, so let's go to those. Next question. Do you find that if students have more time to eat, longer lunch periods, would that help reduce waste? Has anyone kind of seen that firsthand?
I mean, that was one of the strategies in that review that I was talking about that was successful in reducing waste. That's all. And also, I mean, anecdotally, I've been in schools for the past 2 years, and there are schools that I'm in that have lunch periods that are 20 minutes long and then up to like 35 to 40 minutes long. It's sometimes hard to tell because there are so many factors that influence waste. And so in the school that has a 40-minute lunch period, they also might be a smaller school with scratch cooking and like all of these other factors that could impact it. And so there really needs to be more studies that are looking at comparable schools that have like a 20-minute lunch period versus a 35-minute lunch period. But in general, what we have found so far and what we are advocating for schools to do is have those longer lunch periods.
I'll just jump in and say, for the school food professionals, I think that having a little more time is definitely helpful, and especially when we're looking at possibly serving scratch freshly prepared meals, it takes time to chew that food, and it takes time to eat that food. And we know kids, this is also an opportunity to build community and socialize and have a positive experience in eating together. So I feel like having a longer lunch period, maybe like a happy medium, finding that good time is definitely going to help with preventing food waste.
Yeah. There's so much going on during lunchtime in cafeterias. Having been there yesterday at a middle school, I was like, my mind was swirling, trying to like, look at all of the dynamics that are going on in a middle school lunch cafeteria. Um, So interesting. And I know there's a number of people working on more time to eat. I know Center for Eco Literacy in California, that's a top policy priority for them. I know that our policy team, MJ, is looking at that too. You know, beyond the food waste and all these tactical pieces, it's it's also about valuing mealtime and the value you place in mealtime and giving people time to sit and eat and respect the food and respect the meal, that I think is important for us to consider. All right, we have some more. So here's the next one. If a state has a restrictive interpretation of the USDA share table guidance, how would you suggest a school go about advocating for change?
I can take this one.
Great.
I think one of the most important things we can all do is understand who our representatives are at the different levels of government. And one of the things you can do is identify who represents you at the state level, and then frankly, set up a meeting with them. They want to hear from constituents. This is how they, come up with their priorities and actually legislate. And so if you can set up a meeting with them and even other folks from your school or community and share why this is important and how it can be changed, they can be an advocate for you. Of course, that's not always going to go as easy peasy as that. And so I think there are things to make your approach even stronger, like showing up with a group of folks, coming with examples of how this has been done in other places, maybe in places that feel kind of applicable or interesting to wherever you are. So for example, you wouldn't want to bring an example from a state that maybe your representative hates. So just think about some things like that, like how to make your case and bring it to them. That's kind of, I would say, the basics of how to do state advocacy. But I think it's really powerful because they do really want to hear from you. And that they're going to be a really great voice to help you get that done.
Mara, can you say the question? Was it about if like a parent or somebody wants to
No,
implement a share table?
no, it was when a state has restrictive guidance around share table, how
Restrictive
can you
guidance.
advocate for um uh less restrictive, opportunity for the district to have the share table?
Got it. Cool. Yvette covered it.
That was not an exact quote. I was remembering that as I'm looking at all the questions. Okay, we have, I think, one more highlighted audience question. Cole, if there's another one, let me know. You can put it in the chat for me. This one is, where can we learn more about shared refrigerators, and do they work like community fridges? Does anyone have any thoughts there? Well,
In short, I mean, I don't think there's been much done on them. I would say that they work less like a community fridge and more like part of the share table, so that they would be, what I have heard from other districts who are doing this is, instead of having a cooler on a table to put milks in, they have an actual refrigerator that students are using during their lunch period. If they come out and they have a milk and they end up not wanting it, they put it in the fridge and then someone else can take it out. Exactly how you would do with an apple on the share table or a packaged sandwich or something like that. But I will say that I have talked to some districts who then are deciding what to do with those milks or those refrigerated items at the end of the day. So are they taking them back into their kitchen and reserving them the next day? Maybe, but they also might be treating them more like a community fridge, like you were saying, and donating them out to a community organization or other folks or parents at the end of the day or something like that.
Thanks, Kaitlyn. I think also if we can find more information about it, we'll put it in the follow-up email. Okay, I think we're going to have time for one more question before we try and close things out. This one, it's from someone kind of touches on some further webinar content, but we'll see. We'll see if we have any takers on it. It strikes me that schools have control over the preparation and service side of the food system, but how are needs communicated to farmers and distributors upstream in the system? I know we're kind of getting into the procurement webinar, which is coming later in the fall, but does anyone have any thoughts on this? I can say it one more time. It strikes me that schools have control over the preparation and service side of the food system, but how are needs communicated to farmers and distributors upstream in the system?
Yeah, I think it just starts, in my opinion, where I've seen, food producers start with like this one product that they then start getting into one school, and then by word of mouth they start getting to another school, and then they're like, well, how do I manage distribution? Then it's about talking to distributors. So I feel like it just starts with that relationship building, truly. I mean, we've talked to a vendor in West Sacramento called Next Generation Foods, who mentioned that he has some rice, some broken rice that he's been gathering through, through like the hulling process. And, sometimes that amazing regeneratively grown rice is shipped off to be processed in other things in the food system, and that product is so nutritional that it could be utilized in school food. So now he's trying to look for a market of like, hey, I have this broken rice. What can we do in creating a market in school food? So I think it's that truly that like collaboration and partnership is the way to then communicate these values to the farmers and food producers.
Yeah, I would concur. And I would just say that, typically, there's so many people on this webinar that could also contribute to this answer. I'm looking at the list right now. I'm like, oh man, there's like, can I call in RJ? Can I call in all these other people? But typically school districts have a prime vendor, and then they have kind of direct vending with farmers, and then they also have the commodity foods program. And the commodity foods program, usually they're placing their orders in February, March for the following school year. So there's like this flow to that. But one of the things that we see at the Chef Ann Foundation in kind of working with small and mid-sized school districts is that a lot of times they don't have the administration or volume or coordination to buy from kind of local farmers. And so one of the programs that our head of sustainability is working on, procurement sustainability, Vanessa Zyphon, is she is working on something called, and also Lee Howe, called Values Aligned Procurement Collectives, where we're going to try and group small and mid-sized districts together to purchase more local regenerative organic food and work with those farmers to plan out those purchasing from a long-term perspective. And that's starting in California and then moving to Arizona and New Mexico. And so there's more to come on that. With 1 minute left, I'm going to say our questions are concluded. I want to thank our panelists. I also just want to thank our amazing Chef Ann Foundation team for all the work they did in putting this together. I don't know how you guys feel, but for me, talking about these progressive issues right now and understanding that we are all part of this greater community of change is really inspiring. And I hope it was inspiring for you. It takes a village, which is why we want to invite panelists to come talk from all these different amazing organizations. You will receive a follow-up note with the recording of today's conversation, as well as the relevant materials we talked about. Please join us in September. Our next webinar is Healthy School Food for Thought series, and it will focus on the overdependence of ultra-processed food in school meals and really examine the challenges they present and the opportunities. And we, on that webinar, our panelists are going to be Chef Ann Cooper herself, Anna LaPay, who's the executive director for the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, MJ Kepner, who is our senior director of policy at the Chef Ann Foundation, and Dr. Christopher Gardner, who is at Stanford Nutrition Studies Research Group. So thank you, everyone, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your day, great rest of your week.